Hello, hello. Welcome to Courage Becomes Her, where we connect and share real life stories. I'll talk with women whom I love and I'm inspired by, women who are experiencing life just like you and me. I'm excited for us to gather together and cultivate confidence, courage, and joy in life and work. It's my birthday. So as you can imagine, having the birthday that I do has meant that it has always been colored by traditions and fabulous ways of celebrating. Everything from fireworks to strawberry shortcake, watermelon parades, barbecues, sandcastle contests, water balloon wars, you name it. But over the last 10 to 12 years or so, I've added in a few of my own birthday traditions that fill the day for me with significance. And I want to tell you about one of those traditions because it is a meaningful rhythm that you can adopt as well and make it your own. So this tradition is that I read through all my journal entries since my previous birthday. So most of you know, as you've listened to Courage Becomes Her, or followed me online or been a client of mine or whatnot, that I write in a journal nearly daily as a means of meditating, praying, wrestling through my thoughts and my learnings. And so I read through everything that I wrote over the previous year, which reminds me of all that I've journeyed through and everything that I've been challenged by and changed by, and that has just been a part of my life for that year. So as I read through all of last year's journal entries, I became aware of some themes, and I want to share those themes with you today through this conversation. So you know that I believe that life requires courage. And some days we recognize that courage that is required. It feels like we really are wading in deeply into that area of courage or an area of courage. And other days it feels like we're able to just run the race with ease and it just doesn't require maybe as much courage. But over the last year, I have been called to 7 specific areas of courage. And these are areas where I'm continuing to be called to them. So, of course, as is the case, anytime that we're learning something or being called to something or being challenged by something, we see it all around us. And that certainly is the case with these 7 areas that I'm going to talk with us about. So they are regularly showing up in my coaching sessions as my clients walk through similar learnings, and they're also showing up in the podcast conversations. So I'm going to share these 7 with you, spend just a couple minutes talking about each one, share a podcast episode or 2 that you can listen to if that particular one is one that you also are being called to have courage about, because I know that that's going to be the case for you. So let's listen in together and learn together of the 7 areas where I am being called to have courage. Okay, so number 1 is, may I have the courage to choose life-giving over busy. So let me tell you a little bit about what this one means to me and what it looks like in my life. So this shows up as just because you can doesn't mean you should and doesn't mean that you have to. So how I frame this and how I'm looking at this is I think of Eric Liddell, the Olympic gold medalist from the 1920s, and he talks about how he runs to feel God's pleasure. So this idea of having something that brings gladness, having something that is life-giving, and that we let go of our obsession with productivity, with activity, with busyness, and that we simply focus on what is life-giving and what it brings gladness and what allows us to feel God's pleasure. I think just a little bit about the short story in the Bible where Mary and Martha, the two sisters, have Jesus over for a meal, and Martha simply is in the kitchen being busy, trying to get everything done, make the meal, be productive, and Mary is sitting at the feet of Jesus, just enjoying his company. And what a beautiful picture that is for us of choosing what is life-giving versus choosing what is busy. So a couple of podcast episodes that really show this as well. My friend Annette talks about this in regard to her creative expression, her creative playfulness in episode 16, December 27th. And my friend Christina talks about it in regard to quitting her job to become a full-time artist in episode 22, February 7th. So for me, that is, I am leaning into this call to have courage to choose life-giving over busy. So that is our first one. May we have the courage to choose life-giving today. All right, the second one is, may I have the courage to accept my limitations. So a big thing that I've really been thinking about over the last year and have been very focused on is learning the difference between laziness and limitations. And I think that we really struggle with adapting and flexing to whatever the season is that we're in, that we have this expectation that things have to remain the same as what they were in a previous season of life. But some seasons really bring built-in limitations that we need to acknowledge and we need to accept. They can be physical limitations, emotional limitations, constraints of time or finances. And we've got to give ourselves grace about whatever that limitation is, rather than clinging to those expectations of a previous season. I love and appreciate so much where the Apostle Paul talks about how we should not only accept our limitations, which is what I'm being called to, but that we should boast in our limitations. He really paints this picture of that it takes the pressure off of us and reminds us that it's not about our capabilities anyway, but that it's about what God is doing in and through us and not of ourselves. So I just love that so much. A couple of the podcast episodes that really speak to this, my sister-in-law Ashley talks about that in regard to huge life transitions of having a baby and moving to a new state. That's episode 8, November 1st. And then an upcoming episode later this month, my friend Michelle talks about this, and I cannot wait for you to hear the conversation with her. So I am being called to accept my limitations. So may we have the courage to accept our limitations. All right, the third one is, may I have the courage to get rid of toxic thinking. Okay, we have talked about this, so this is not a new one for you at all. But fear, insecurity, and doubt feed on toxic thinking. I mean, think about it, just simply the analogy for athletes of the mental game for athletes being just as important as their actual physical game of what's going on in their head as they are preparing and activating their athletic skill. So we just simply are robbed of peace and joy when we believe false narratives. And I really, again, I want to talk about the Apostle Paul because he has just such wisdom about this one also. He tells us that we shouldn't blindly accept what we see or hear, but that we should put it to the test and let God change our thinking about it. And I think that that is such a relevant and important thing for all of us, especially kind of in this deconstructing, reconstructing our faith element. If you listen to last week's bonus episode with Melissa Johnson, she talks about, and she wrote in her book about how she made assumptions about what God thought of her, like what God actually thinks about her. But she said that she spent time investigating it, and she learned that what she assumed was not actually accurate. And it made all the difference to her in her healing to be able to get rid of the toxic thinking, to get rid of the assumptions and replace it with truth. In the November 15th, episode 10, I have a conversation, just me, where I talk about what it's like when we're triggered by the stories of other women. And I think that that really speaks a lot to this topic of toxic thinking. So I'd love to encourage you to go back and listen to that one. So that's number 3. May we have the courage to get rid of toxic thinking. Okay, this one is a tough one. Number 4, may I have the courage to not feel sorry for myself. So self-pity is kryptonite. It just is so destructive for us and to us. And I do want to acknowledge, first off, before I talk a little bit more about that, that lamentation is so good and so healthy, and we need to name our losses, name our concerns, name our frustrations, call them out. Those are so healthy to do, and we are called through the Bible, through scripture, to lament. That is a healthy thing to do. But when we let it move to a place of believing that we are deserving or that we are owed, we lose the big picture perspective. And you've seen it just as well as I have, that causes us to lose our ability to be compassionate and to be kind. I think of the biblical example of Judas, that Judas was driven to betray Jesus because he felt sorry for himself and because he thought that he was owed something. And just, I mean, it's such a tragic story and such a tragic end to his life as a result of that. In episode 38, May 30th, my friend Laura talks about what it can look like to lose ourselves to grief. And she just builds such a beautiful picture of what that looks like, of when feeling sorry for ourselves, when grief goes over the deep end, if you will. So number 4, I'm being called to have courage to not feel sorry for myself. So may we have the courage to not feel sorry for ourselves. Okay, number 5, may I have the courage to own my fault and say I'm sorry. So if you listened to Corey and my episode number 39, June 6th, you definitely heard some of this in our conversation. But one of the things that has been very difficult for me and a big learning lesson for me is that getting defensive does not actually make you feel better, and it does not actually help the situation. But what is helpful is finding and declaring your ownership and your responsibility, which those are so hard. I am the first to admit that is really, really difficult. But I can also say from personal experience that it is far more helpful. I think a lot about, I talk a lot in coaching sessions about shame. And one of the things that I know that creates shame is hiding from ourselves, hiding from others. And again, kind of coming back to that defensive spirit. And there is so much freedom in admitting our fault. And when we are able to do that, it reduces that shame, which is just so lovely. I think, we hear, what are the magic words? Obviously, please, thank you. We hear those are the magic words. But to me, the magic words are, I'm sorry. Will you please forgive me? Those are magic words both for the giver and the receiver. Just such meaningful words that can make such a huge difference in a relationship. So I think about like Peter, the apostle disciple Peter in the Bible. He denies Christ. I think most all of us know that story. And the freedom that comes for him when he is forgiven and is able to move forward from that denial is just so beautiful. And I think that that is something that is waiting for each and every one of us, is that freedom. One other episode that you can listen to on this topic is my friend and marriage coach, Jill, episode 35, May 9th. She talks about that in regard to her own marriage. So another hard one that I'm definitely being very challenged by is, may I have the courage to own my fault and say, I'm sorry. Okay, number 6, may I have the courage to let go of the outcome. So this one is such a challenge and has been, I've talked about this before because it's been a challenge for me for well over a decade, and I definitely have been growing, but definitely one of those lifelong areas of growth. So as much as we think we can, we really cannot make things happen, which is so annoying, but so true. So we drive ourselves and others crazy by trying to force things, control things, manipulate things, and push our agenda to a specific outcome. I think about Sarah in the Old Testament and how she desperately wanted to have a baby, and God told her that they would have a baby, but she didn't believe God and she had to make it happen. She had to do it and have it control the outcome. And so she gave her maidservant to her husband to be able to produce a child. And if we know anything about that story, we know that that was a train wreck. So there is just such a relief that comes when we can let go of the outcome. There is a pressure that comes off of us, a pressure that we were never meant to have, burdens that we were never meant to carry. So I am being challenged and called to have the courage to let go of the outcome. So 2 episodes that you can listen to that talk more about this. My friend Gina in episode 36 from May 16th, she talks about what this looks like for letting go of our dreams, specifically in regard to career. And my friend Elizabeth also talks about it. She reframes it to look at how we can look at life as an adventure. That is episode 30, April 4th. So may we have the courage to let go of the outcomes. Okay, number 7, may I have the courage to trust God and His timing, His methods, and His will. Okay, it really feels weird to me sometimes to admit that it's possible that somebody knows us better than we know ourselves, but our Creator really does know us better than we know ourselves. And that's something that when we can embrace that, acknowledge that, accept that, believe that, it makes all the difference in the world. There's a phrase, I don't know where it came from, but Corey says it all the time. I'm sure it came from a theologian or a philosopher somewhere, but it is, God knows the best means to the best ends for the best possible reasons. And all that shows me, what that shows me is that God, as our creator, knows that we are individuals, and He knows us as individuals, as the unique person that we are, and what is best for us, what is the best timing for us, what is the best method to use with us. and what's the best end goal for us. And to me, that means that our healing, our grieving, our growing, our living, our being, all of that happens as God wills it, desires it, because he knows best for each and every one of us. So timings are going to be different for each and every one of us. Methods are going to be different for each and every one of us. The end result, the outcome is going to be different for each and every one of us, because he knows each and every one of us as individuals, as unique created beings. And I'm just so grateful for that. And it does help me to lean into having courage to trust him more, knowing that he knows us each individually that way. So 2 episodes that you can listen to hear more about this. My friend Jodie in episode 7 from October 25th, she talks about that in regard to grieving and loss and a time of transition in her own life. And my friend and author Nicole talks about this, of how we can reframe expectations and reframe the idea of celebration. That's episode 14 from December 13th. So may we have the courage to trust God and his timing, methods, and will. So, wow, thank you so much for letting me share some of my birthday with you. So another one of my birthday traditions, which some of you have heard me talk about and write about in the past, is that I write a gratitude list for the year. And the Courage Becomes Her is most certainly on that list this year. I am just tremendously grateful for you and the way that you have come together, as well as come alongside me and are creating just such a beautiful community here. So thank you for that. I would be remiss to also not publicly thank and express my gratitude for Scott Higbee of Studio C Sound Design, who does all of the production and editing for Courage Becomes Her. I am just so grateful for him, and he is on my list of my gratitude for this year. So I'd love to ask you to help me to celebrate my birthday, if that's okay for me to ask you to give me a birthday gift. So the first one is, I have another birthday tradition, which many of you are aware of, that I ask and we participate in giving to others. So as a community over the last 9 or 10 years, we have actually donated over $17,000 to worthy and wonderful causes and organizations. And usually I ask that we do that publicly and we can celebrate together. But this year I'm just asking for us to do that privately. So will you just on your own think of an organization that is worthy of your financial donation, or if your finances are too tight, your time donation? I'm going to be donating today to Degrees of Skill, which is an organization that you'll hear a little bit more about in next week's podcast episode, next Tuesday. And then the second thing that I'd love to ask you to help me to celebrate, or way to celebrate my birthday, is by sharing this episode with a woman in your life. So you hear me say that in almost every single episode, but word of mouth is still the number one way that people find out about podcasts. And I just know that there are women who feel like they are alone, and having the Courage Becomes Her community as a part of their life is emboldening them, encouraging them, and supporting them in their journey. And so I just really would love for you to consider sharing this episode with a woman in your life. I do want to just super quick give some shout outs of thanks to people, women who have supported the podcast in one way or another over the last couple of weeks of sharing, promoting, and passing it on. Jennifer, Renee, Stacy, Michelle, Jodie, Erica, Rhonda, Nancy, Lisa, Lori, Sherry, Chisholm, and Brenda. So thank you all so very much. So may we go out into this week and this life having the courage to choose life-giving over busy, choose to accept our limitations, to get rid of toxic thinking, to not feel sorry for ourselves, to own our faults and say, I'm sorry, to let go of the outcome, and to trust God. What an honor to help you to cultivate confidence, courage, and joy in your life and work. Thank you so much for inviting me to journey with you. I look forward to being back with you next week, where we'll hear another story from a woman whom I love and am inspired by and look forward to learning from.